Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining from today. Thanks for joining our weekly live stream to cover all things related to digital transformation. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys, including helping them through the digital strategy process, helping them select software, and ultimately helping them select software, or ultimately helping them implement the software, I should say. Um, we are doing this live discussion here today as part of our weekly production of our weekly Transformation Ground Control podcast. So every Tuesday morning, same time, same place, streaming to all these platforms, we do these live discussions. Sometimes we have guests. Typically, we do have guests. Today, we do not. We have more of a general discussion we'll get into here today. But oftentimes, we have a guest in interviews, and we take audience questions, and we curate additional content, edit it, and then we create the full episode of Transformation Ground Control. And those episodes get released every Wednesday. So you'll be able to see this discussion and the finished product here in about 2 weeks when we release the full episode. So thanks for being here as part of the live production here today. Today's topic is digital transformation trends and predictions for 2025. It's that time of year where we start looking at what to expect in 2025. What are the trends we should be aware of? What are the things materializing in the industry that might affect how you go about your digital transformation? These are all things that we need to discuss and we want to discuss here today. Before we jump into the conversation, though, I'd love to hear a couple things. First of all, love to hear the audience where you're joining from today. So if you don't mind dropping in the chat, what city and country are you joining from? We always love to see where the global audience is joining from here today. So thank you in advance for dropping in the chat what city and country you're joining from. I can see the all the streams that we're streaming to right now. So any comments or questions you have along the way, I'll see those here, including what city and country you're from. But I also love to hear from you to hear what you think some of the biggest trends are. So as we're going through the discussion at any point, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you think you're most excited about, what you think is going to materialize here in the digital transformation industry here in the coming months and in the coming year as we plan for 2025. So we're going to get into the conversation here today. Again, digital transformation trends predictions for 2025. Want to get into some discussion around what some of those trends might be. And before I jump in here and we start talking about some of these trends predictions, I want to say hello to Vladimir joining from Montreal, Canada. Thank you for being here today and for dropping in the chat where you're joining from today. We have someone on LinkedIn joining from Toulouse, France, very pretty part of the world. So thank you for being here today. Darian joining from Denver. We have Muhammad joining from Maryland in the U.S. We have Cornelius joining from Atlanta here in the U.S. And then we also have Sid joining from Sayreville, New Jersey. So thank you all for dropping in the chat where you're joining from today. I appreciate you being here and I'd love to hear where the rest of you are joining from as well. So as we start to think about some of the general trends to be aware of here in the coming year, and as we think about our digital strategies and how we're going to go about the process of defining a digital strategy and ultimately executing on that, there's a lot of different trends to be aware of. A lot of things have changed in the industry. And if I were to sort of summarize where we are just at a high level and then really dig in and start to have a chat with you guys and hear your feedback as well. But as I look to sort of summarize where we're at and where we're headed in 2025, if I had to pick one thing to summarize, I would say it is definitely an increased pace of change. And the reason I say that is because the trajectory that the technology change is on right now is so dramatic. So when we think about things like AI and predictive analytics and certainly cloud implementations, all these things are areas that are changing very quickly. And technology has always changed very quickly in the 25 years I've been doing this. But I feel like just in the last year or two, the pace of change has really accelerated dramatically. When you look at how quickly ChatGPT caught on, for example, and how quickly it really brought artificial intelligence to the forefront, not just for consumers, but also for businesses, sort of in parallel, that was something that really changed the pace of change. And then you add to the fact that a lot of companies are quickly adopting or quickly embracing the cloud and moving their on-premise systems to the cloud still. And you add that all up and you see that there's a big increased pace of change. And so I think that's really the name of the game for 2025 is how do we manage that change? How do we navigate the change? How do we not let the change overwhelm us or become something that we just can't consume as an organization? Those are all things that we really got to think through and be aware of as we go into the new year. And I'd be curious to hear too from the audience here what you think some of the big challenges are, or some of the big changes are that you're seeing in digital transformation, or that you're most excited about. I'm just mentioning a couple here with cloud and artificial intelligence, but would love to hear any other comments you have, or any other things you think are changing particularly quickly. Also want to say hello to Mukushimar, joining from Pune, India. We have someone joining from Santiago, Chile. Thank you for being here today as well. And here's an interesting comment here from YouTube. And joining from India, I want to know the trends in digital transformation in higher education. And so, yes, we'll absolutely talk about some of the trends that apply to not only higher education, but other industries as well. And then another comment here, question here, or a comment related to trends in the coming year. This is from Vladimir on LinkedIn. Vladimir says, I have many thoughts. I think there's still a lot of work to be done in fundamentals, better networks, data integration, Internet of Things, deployments, etc. For advanced manufacturers, there's definitely an appetite for testing and research and developing various AI, ML, and LLM solutions. So I think that's a great point. I actually agree with you. And I like how you're calling out some of the fundamentals here, because I think it's easy to forget about the fundamentals. Like you mentioned, data integration. I think that's a really good one. A lot of organizations have struggled for decades, if not longer, to really get their data cleansed and cleaned up and under control, and to get the right data governance in place and that sort of thing. And in fact, in last week's podcast episode, we covered data management in quite a bit of detail. So if you're interested in learning more about data governance, data management, last week's episode of this podcast, Transformation Ground Control, we dive into that. So a good point. And the other thing I like about the fundamental comment here is that when you look at something like data integration, there's a lot of value that comes from that on its own, but certainly it also enables things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the better data we have, the better data governance we have, the better job we're going to do adhering to or embracing some of those newer technologies. So here's an interesting question from Sid on LinkedIn. Sid says, change is constant. It's how we react to it. Companies must master the fundamentals and create a strong foundation, which can then be better built upon. This is easier said than done, as there is too much technical and business debt and lack of shared vision. So that's a great point. And I think, ever since COVID, this whole concept of resiliency, change resiliency, and being able to adapt to change really became sort of front and center, became top of mind for a lot of leaders, because the world was going through so much change during COVID. But I think that's something that's really stuck with the business industry since then, is this concept of how do we remain flexible? How do we remain agile? How do we remain resilient? How do we build an organization that can adapt to all these changes that we can't predict? Clearly, as we've seen in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of change in the space. And so we've got to figure out how we're going to navigate that. And so I like also in this comment too, the concept of shared vision. If we can make sure that anything we do, in the ways we manage change, in the ways we adapt to change, and the types of technologies we deploy and embrace, if we can do that in the context of making sure it's part of a shared vision and that we're all on the same page with what that vision is, that's going to be a lot more successful and a lot more effective than organizations that get overwhelmed by all the possibilities, all these technology changes that are happening in the space right now. So great comments there. Great additional thoughts there. Here's a question from Darian that I'm actually going to ask to the audience. This is from Darian on LinkedIn. Darian says, how are you using AI like ChatGPT? So I'd love to hear, just in general, those of you listening in here today, how are you using ChatGPT or other generative AI, conversational AI, that sort of thing? Are you using it in your business? I'd love to hear your feedback there. And speaking of that, that's sort of a good transition into another trend here that I want to get to. And it's really impossible to talk about trends and predictions here without talking more about, without bringing up AI again. But just the business adoption of artificial intelligence, I think, is something that's going to be prevalent in 2025. I think 2023 and 2024 were the years that it seemed as though organizations were sort of dabbling in AI, or just sort of cautiously optimistic or cautiously dipping their toes into what AI might do for their businesses. But I think there's also a lot of uncertainty around it up until this point. But I think 2025 will be the year where organizations start to figure out how they're actually going to use AI, and they're actually going to start to pilot real use cases, which some organizations have, but I'd say most organizations are still uncertain how to use AI in their organization. So I think it's been around long enough now, and the vendors are investing heavily enough in AI functions in their software, in their core softwares, that it's going to be sort of that tipping point where organizations do start to push harder into the space to really look at ways they can be using AI more effectively. So that's something I think will happen. But I'd love to hear too from the audience on where, if at all, are you using AI in your business? Do you have specific examples or use cases of ways you're using AI so far, or ways that you plan to use it? Or are you still trying to figure out what AI is and how it could affect your business? I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments here on sort of where you fall on the whole change adoption curve, or the whole AI adoption curve in general. So love to hear your thoughts there. So here's another comment from Buggy's Thoughts on YouTube. I mean, IT students are hard to get internships or experience trying to get into consulting. Any tips on things I should be doing? Well, I think certainly educating yourself and networking and being part of events like this is one way to do it, just because you'll be able to learn from some of the peers in the industry, and kind of hear what some of the real world scenarios are, and some of the real world challenges that organizations are facing. So certainly listening to podcasts like this one, and really diving into and learning some of the stuff that, as you're doing here today, is an important first step. But I'd also make sure you network with some of the people you see listening to this same podcast. When you see people comment, be sure to connect with those people and build your network of people that might be able to help you, or either directly or indirectly position you for potential opportunities in the space. And then also just any experience you can get. If you can have applicable experience of using AI, for example, or using enterprise technology, and you can really point to that as a selling point for why you'd be a good candidate, I think those are just a few ideas that come to mind. But certainly getting to know the right people, getting the right skill set and knowledge, and certainly getting the experience, even if it's unpaid experience, or things that you do on your own just as a hobby, or just in your own exploration of learning different things, that can all be things that you can use to position yourself as a more valuable consultant. I want to say hello to Sindre, joining from Horton, Norway. Thanks for joining here today. Here's a good question from Kareem on LinkedIn. Kareem or Karim? Maybe it's Karim. Karen on LinkedIn, I'll say. What are the real on-the-ground issues when it comes to moving from ECC to S4HANA? And I'm actually, if you don't mind here, Karim, I'm going to actually use this question as a segue into another prediction or comment I had, which is one of my predictions here, is the increased frenzy in cloud upgrades. So I think you mentioned SAP and ECC to S4HANA in particular. That's just one example, or that's one of many software vendors or software verticals in the enterprise tech space. It's one of many that are seeing a frenzy of cloud upgrade activity, partially because SAP has designated 2027 as the deadline for ECC customers to get off that system onto the cloud S4HANA software. And, as part of that, what you're seeing is just more, I don't know if chaos is the right word. It probably is the right word. It's just a lot more chaos, a frenzied activity, very hectic, a lot of upgrades happening all at once. And it's putting strain on organizations to try and adapt quickly, or try to migrate quickly to S4HANA or other cloud solutions. And it's also putting strain on the available resources, so skill sets and people that you need on your projects to make them successful. There's an increased demand for that, which I think is another challenge that we're going to get to here in a moment, that I think will continue into 25. So those are, that increased frenzy in cloud upgrades is something that is going to lead to another prediction that I'm going to get to here in a minute. And that is increased digital transformation failures. I think the fact that so many organizations are moving so quickly to the cloud, in some cases they're not ready for the change, and in some cases they have other bigger issues they should be dealing with. But because the software vendors have sort of forced this cloud migration all in mass, that's causing a lot of organizations to get into these projects a little too deep when perhaps they're not ready for it. Perhaps they just don't have the right foundation or infrastructure in place. They don't have the right alignment. They're not focused on the right things. but yet they're going through these projects because software vendors are sort of forcing them to in a lot of ways, because they want to make sure that they have those upgrades happening in place, or happening in a timely fashion here. So, but as far as how to make that cloud migration successful, back to Karim's question around moving from ECC to S4, I think there's a few things that come to mind here. One is you want to make sure that you're ready for it. First of all, make sure you have a good reason for why you're moving from ECC to S4. And I would say that it's not enough to say because SAP told you have to. That's not a good enough reason to say that's what we're going to base our whole burning platform for change, because that's not a good enough reason to do that. So I think making sure you have a clear vision for what it is you want to get out of the project. Make sure you have a good idea of what business value you expect to get. Make sure you have a good idea of what sort of business improvements and organizational improvements you expect to see, and really having clarity around that before you get into a project. I think that's really important, whether you're moving from ECC to S4 or any system to a new system. I'd say the same thing. So those are just some things that come to mind there that I think are very, very important. There's a question or a comment here from Sid on LinkedIn. Sid says, a quick win for AI is the ability to summarize meeting notes via Zoom. This is making it easier to summarize results and action items. Many of the AI offered by vendors are not necessarily ready for prime time. However, on the machine learning side, there has been more due diligence on using machine learning for data validation and enrichment. So those are really good comments. And I agree. There are some great ways that you could be using AI at a really micro level, to do your job more effectively and to scale yourself better. I know I personally use AI all the time for summarizing meeting notes. I also use it to write blogs. So I don't write blogs anymore like I used to religiously for years and years. I used to religiously write at least one blog a week. Now I write 3 or 5 blogs a week, but I don't actually write them. I just use AI to write those for me based on transcripts of my own videos and my own presentations and things like that. So it's still my words, my thoughts, but it's using AI to really scale myself in a way that I hadn't in the past. And that's just, one small example, but a lot of organizations would probably find that there's a lot of content creation that they could be doing, and not just content creation like creating blogs, but also even things like creating a product master based off a CAD drawing, or sort of using different data sets that you have in the organization, using AI to help you make sense of it, to summarize it, to create new content based on other inputs that you have in the organization. So there's a lot of ways we can be using AI in that way. And of course, there's the whole conversational user interface aspect of it. If we can be giving our employees easier access to information through conversational AI, that's something that could be sort of low-hanging fruit as well. So these are just a few examples, but I'd love to, I think it's more important to figure out, how organizations can be using AI more effectively. Here's a comment from Mohammed on LinkedIn. Mohammed says, can't wait for AI to be part of the planning, whether it's production planning, MRP, financial planning, or any planning an organization needs to have. And I think this is a really good point. I think this is where there's a ton of value, a ton of hidden value in organizations and their ability to get business value from AI. I think these are great examples. I mean, we look at something like production planning or material resource planning, which is what MRP is. When you think about a manufacturer and all the raw materials they have to manage, all the production shop floor scheduling they have to do, even scheduling workers on the shop floor and scheduling when machines are going to be switched over and set up for different production runs. You think about all that optimization that organizations have really struggled with for years and years. I mean, the ERP systems were largely built to help address this whole production planning and MRP thing, but ERP systems never really fully mastered it in the way that AI potentially could. So I'm curious as well to see how AI can use different data sets, different data points, both internally and externally, to provide better demand forecasts, which would give you a better ability to better plan production, because now you have a better accurate understanding of what your customer demand is. So now you can therefore potentially use that data to now better understand how you can be planning your production better to meet that customer demand. And then, of course, what's even cooler to think about is when you think about all the external factors that might affect customer demand or might affect your production schedule. And if you can use AI to help optimize that and figure out and help you see things that you as an organization and a team wouldn't see on your own because you have human flaws and blind spots and whatnot, that's where I think it could be really cool for AI to really be a game changer for organizations. But at the same time, I also think that organizations are trying to figure out how to walk before they run. How can they use these little, more, maybe a little simpler use cases, just like what Sid had talked about before, kind of going back to this comment here, the quick win with summarizing meeting notes and summarizing results and action items and that sort of thing. And he also mentions data validation and enrichment as an area where you could be using AI more effectively. So this is, I think this is great conversation here because there's small, simple ways you could be using AI. And there's also these more advanced ways, like with the production planning example that Sid brings up here, or I'm sorry, Mohammed brings up here as well. All right. So here's another comment from LinkedIn. AI is currently not mainly used in the core consultancy job, as in suggesting best practices captured from certain ERP systems perspective, or even from a pure business and operational point of view. Neither is it used in the actual implementation. However, I found AI useful in generating or suggesting KPIs for conducting research and development tasks, summarizing key features about certain vertical solutions out there. However, in the future, I see AI vital in process mining prior to embarking into digital transformations, even for SMEs, small and mid-sized companies. So very, very interesting point. I think that there is a lot of opportunity for us consultants to be using AI more effectively, especially when you think about things like, when you get into some of the technical stuff like configuration of software, integration, certainly data analysis, things like that. I think that's where AI can add a lot of value there. I want to say hello to Ivan joining from Sofia, Bulgaria. So thanks for joining here today, Ivan. And here's an interesting question or a comment here from William on YouTube. William says, my wife runs data groups for a large research organization. Last week, she mentioned having a host of nuisance tech issues. I asked her if they did a cloud migration. She said, how did you know? So yes, cloud migrations are difficult and challenging. And I think that's something that's going to continue into the new year in 2025 and beyond. And speaking of that, we talked about the increased frenzy in cloud upgrades as one prediction, but here's another one that's sort of related to that, which is increase in digital transformation failures. And I alluded to this earlier. I think digital transformations are going to fail at an increasing rate for a few reasons. One is, and actually it's a few reasons that we've already discussed. The increased pace of change. Anytime technology changes as fast as it is, that just puts more pressure on organizations and it creates more confusion and potential paths to failure, if that makes sense. So there's more, when technology is changing that quickly, organizations have more trouble keeping up with the pace of change. And that just puts more strain on those organizations to change faster than they're potentially really conditioned to do. Not saying you shouldn't change and you should just ignore change. That's not at all what I'm saying, but I am saying back to that point of change resiliency and being able to lead an organization through change. I think those are all really important things that need to happen as a result of these sorts of initiatives. So when you think about that increased pace of change, and then you also add to the fact that you have this mass migration of organizations throughout the world that are moving from their legacy on-prem system to their cloud-based system in a relatively short period of time, in a relatively compressed period of time because of some of the vendor sunsetting issues and just the pace of change in general. That's putting more pressure on organizations to go through change that they're not necessarily ready for and they're not necessarily prepared to succeed. And so that's why it's so important for organizations to make sure they have a clear vision of where they want to go and make sure they have a clear direction and alignment as an organization before they jump too far into the overall project. So I think the increase in failures will absolutely increase. We just see too many organizations that are struggling right now with that cloud migration and the forced fast migration, shortage of skills. That's actually another prediction that I'll just call out here now as one of the predictions is, skills shortages have been an issue for years now. It's nothing new in 2025. That is something that'll continue and probably accelerate in 2025 because you get, for example, all these companies that are scrambling now to go from SAP ECC to S4HANA, there's only so many SAP consultants in the world that know what they're doing and are good. And those consultants are all in high demand right now because you have so many organizations that are going through these changes all in a relatively short period of time. So that skill shortage creates more pressure on an organization and increases the rate or the probability of failure even more. So you've got to look at all these underlying currents here, these undercurrents in the industry, and say, how does this affect us, and how do we mitigate the risks of all these things we're talking about? And the good news here, it may sound like I'm saying it's all bad news because there are risks and there's challenges, but the good news is there's ways to mitigate those risks and challenges and ways to overcome them. And it's just a matter of being aware of them. With skill shortages, for example, you may have to assume your project's going to take you a little longer than you might otherwise expect, or that might otherwise be realistic. I mean, I think in general, most organizations are very unrealistic about how long an implementation takes, but even more so nowadays when you add up all these different factors, the skill shortages, the increasing pace of change, the fact that vendors are changing their software so quickly, the fact that businesses are dealing with a bunch of challenges, supply chain issues and economic issues and potential layoffs, acquisitions. There's all these other things happening that have nothing to do with technology that are also putting pressure on these organizations. And at some point, something's got to give. And oftentimes these technology initiatives end up paying the price or end up taking longer than expected or costing more than expected because of all these other internal and external dynamics that are contributing to some of the difficulties that organizations face when they're going through these implementations. So skill shortages, that's something else that I think will be a challenge here in the coming years. But I'm curious to hear from you. What other trends do you see, or what other trends are you most excited about in the digital transformation space? I'd love to hear your thoughts here, whether you're someone implementing ERP systems right now, or whether you're a consultant, or whatever the case may be. I'd love to hear your feedback. Speaking of feedback, here's another comment from Karim on LinkedIn. Another quick one: are all market-leading vendors truly equal in their enterprise software capabilities? And I would say no, they're not. I mean, I'd say they're all good. If you look at market-leading vendors, at least the brand names like SAP and Oracle and Microsoft, Infor, Epicor, or a couple more, Workday, of course, NetSuite. Those are some of the leading, what I would consider some of the leading enterprise software vendors. But I wouldn't say they're equal. I mean, I think they all have their strengths and weaknesses, and they all have their areas of focus. Certain ones are better at certain types of organizations or with certain types of industries, but you really have to make sure you understand more than anything just what your own needs are and what your priorities are. And once you know what your needs and priorities are as an organization, then looking to the software solutions that are out there to figure out which one or ones are going to provide you, the best fit with what you're looking for. That's why going through an objective and comprehensive evaluation process is so important, to make sure that you find the software and you find the nuances in these different software solutions, because they are all very different and they have different strengths and weaknesses for certain. Here's another comment from Pranesh on LinkedIn. Pranesh says, lots of ERPs are using AI effectively. Workday already has a good use of this in features such as candidate ranking, skill ranking, etc. So keeping data clean for a decent long time can really help companies take the AI skills, utilize their predictions better. Great example. And those are great examples of how a software vendor, in this case Workday, is using AI to sort of build into their systems some additional competencies around candidate ranking and skill ranking in these two examples. So those are all great examples of things that will certainly help. And we're certainly, AI can make those existing functions even better than they might have been otherwise. So thank you for that feedback, Pranesh. I also want to get back to this concept of AI. I'd love to hear, for those that are just joining or maybe missed the earlier part of the conversation, or maybe you've had more time to think about it, if you've been on this discussion for a while now. But I'd love to hear from you on where you think you could see AI being used in your business or in businesses in general. Do you see it being used in certain ways now? Do you see possibilities of AI being used to improve businesses in certain ways in the near future? Love to hear your feedback, because I think this is something that's really important, because so many organizations are struggling with how to leverage AI and how to get value out of AI as well, rather than just talking a lot about it, or creating, or focusing on all the buzz. There's a question from Sid on LinkedIn. Sid says, from a system architecture perspective, a hybrid architecture with on-premise and cloud creates challenges to keep the lights on while going through a cloud upgrade. this is often overlooked and leads to delays, as the right resource cannot be at the right place at the right time, as staff downsizing and resource allocation leads to staffing and planning challenges. So I think the key thread here that I'm picking up on, or the key point, is keeping the lights on with your existing on-prem systems while you're going through this transition to the cloud. And in the process, assuming you're not doing like this massive big bang approach, which most organizations don't do, but assuming you're going to have to move through this interim phase where you have some cloud systems and some on-prem systems, that's where it becomes real challenging. And there's a lot of interim integration to manage, a lot of interim data reentry and rekeying and data governance that becomes an issue, because now you're managing multiple environments. And for some organizations, this isn't even just temporary. It's not just an interim process. It becomes longer term, because they might have some legacy on-prem systems that they have to keep or they want to keep, and then they've got cloud systems that are maybe their core ERP systems that now need to integrate with those on-prem systems. So those are all big issues that need to be managed for certain. And it also brings up the importance of increased cybersecurity risk. Cybersecurity is becoming more and more important, and it's becoming more common that organizations struggle with cybersecurity. And the reason I'm bringing this up in the context of Sid's comment a moment ago is because when you start talking about these hybrid environments where you have some on-prem, some cloud systems, it may be important from an operational perspective. There may be very good reasons, regulatory reasons, or functionality reasons why you might have these hybrid environments. So I'm not here to necessarily say hybrid environments are good or bad, but one of the risks of hybrid environments is, even if, let's assume you've got a core cloud system that has world-class cybersecurity controls and cybersecurity protection that's going to protect you from all these bad outside hackers and nefarious actors and potential internal employee breaches, all that stuff. Let's just say you've got this hypothetical situation where you've got these cloud systems that are pretty well locked down. If you have a hybrid situation where you also have now some on-premise systems that are accessing or integrating to those back office cloud systems, now you've increased another entry point, or a potential, a potential lapse, a point of weakness in your systems, because now a hacker is probably going to go attack your old on-prem system to get to your cloud system, even though your cloud system is pretty well locked down, has good cybersecurity controls in place and that sort of thing. Now you've increased the vulnerability, though, by adding on this on-prem system. And that's how a lot of these security breaches are happening now. When you look at, I think it was the SolarWinds breach from a couple of years ago, that massive breach that SolarWinds had. There was, if I remember correctly, I think that was the one where they accessed the core system and brought down the core system. They accessed it through a backdoor. And that backdoor was a third-party bolt-on system that didn't have good cybersecurity controls. So that's why I say cybersecurity is just going to continue to be a challenge, partially because you've got these hybrid environments. You've got a lot of companies that are going through technology change, and that just increases a certain amount of cybersecurity risk right there because of that. But then you also have the just increase in cybersecurity sophistication, or not cybersecurity sophistication, but criminal sophistication, I guess you'd say, when it comes to hacking and attacking networks and trying to access and steal data. Hackers are just getting more and more advanced in their approaches. I know within our organization, it's just crazy how sophisticated some of these phishing and spoofing spams have become, and not spoofing spams, spoofing scams. How big that's become in just in our business, in our here at Third Stage. That's been a big challenge for us. So I can only imagine a big, massive organization with tens of thousands of employees just has that many more thousands of opportunities to create a human lapse that leads to a cybersecurity issue, or it's more of a technical attack on the infrastructure because of the physical cybersecurity weaknesses of the system. So I think those are all things that lead us to more increases cybersecurity risk, and these are things that we absolutely need to focus more on. And it is something that is becoming more important and trendy. You have the chief information security officer now. You didn't used to have that position. It used to just be sort of a function within the CIO role, but now you've got the CISO role that's focused on information security, cybersecurity, that sort of thing. And I think organizations are finally realizing that their technology and their data, their intellectual property, it's all wrapped up in these systems. and they have to protect their assets just like they protect their money and their buildings and their physical inventory and everything else. Same goes for your technology. Your technology is arguably even more important for a lot of organizations, a lot more important than the physical assets they might have in terms of buildings or inventory or products, whatever the case may be. So great stuff there. And thank you for those comments there. Here's an interesting comment here from Ivan on LinkedIn. Ivan says, seeing greater demand for low-code, no-code customized workflows. As the pace of change increasing, such features become more valuable for the end users. How are the leading vendors doing in regard, or how are the leading vendors doing in this regard for their cloud offerings? I think, that's a great point. I think the low-code, no-code customized workflow thing is super cool. I think it helps bridge that gap between the benefit of having commercial off-the-shelf pre-configured package solutions and the need that organizations have to have some sort of flexibility to change that software to fit their needs and to change their business as their business grows. So, I think for too long, the industry kind of focused on this concept that, well, don't change the software because we have best practices built into our technology and our workflows. But I think organizations and even vendors in a lot of ways are starting to realize that's all just a hoax and that's not realistic. So what I love about low code, no code is it's sort of taking the best of both worlds. It's sort of acknowledging that, yeah, there's some R&D and some standard workflows and some value that has been built in these standard off the shelf, prepackaged software systems, but it also recognizes that it's not perfect. It's not going to fit everyone's needs. So if you can have a way to change the software without having to go in and change the code and sort of break the software, risk breaking the software, if you could do that with a low code, no code environment, then I think that's, super important and something that's super valuable to organizations. So love the idea. And I love the thought here, or the addition to our list that low code, no code customized workflows are increasingly important. And that's an important trend in terms of how the leading vendors are doing in this regard for their cloud offerings. I think some are doing better than others. I mean, I think it's another buzzword that a lot of them are just sort of throwing out there, but there's a handful that are, I'd say, doing a better job with a low code, no code environment. I think of like Odoo is one that's an open source system that has more of a low code sort of environment. I know there's if anyone's familiar with Jan Bond, he's the guy that founded Infor software. Or I'm sorry, not Infor, but Bond software, which was acquired by Infor a couple decades ago. And now he's since started another software company that's called Rapid, and RAPPIT, and it's a low code, no code sort of enterprise technology that helps tie together, multiple systems and provides workflows. And it's sort of an easier way to potentially use technology in a low code, no code way without having to deploy an entirely new ERP system, which can be a lot more complicated and risky. So you look at Odoo, you look at Rapid, you look at other software vendors that are investing more in this low code tool set. I think that's a good sign. But I think when you're evaluating systems, though, it is something you'd want to dig into and really just see what the tool set is and what do they really mean by low code, no code. Because a lot of times low code, no code might be, well, you're just allowing me to change the color of a button. That's not really giving me a customized workflow. It's just giving me sort of a personalization that I always had. Every software vendor would allow like relatively simple changes to the system that doesn't change the core fundamental aspects of what the software does. But when you look at things like Odoo and Rapid and some of these other low code, no code systems, you actually can change the workflow in a more meaningful way. And speaking of Odoo, and this is actually part of why I just brought up Odoo, because I saw this question and so they popped in my mind, but this is from Emro on YouTube. Emro says, what's your opinion on Odoo on-prem and how to test the functions of an ERP? Is an iterative process. Also, how do we determine the suitable data model for an ERP system? There's a lot in that question. I'll try to answer much of that question. I may not get to all of those points or all of those sub questions here, but I will say that Odoo ERP is a good system. It's in our top 10 list. We do every year a independent tech agnostic ranking of the top ERP systems in the market. In fact, if you'd like to see that list, you can just scan this QR code on the screen in front of you, or if you're listening to the audio only podcast, I've included a link below to the 2025 ERP report or the digital transformation report. You can scan the QR code right here on the screen in front of you, or you can go to the links below. But point here is Odoo is in that top 10 list. You'll see it when you scan and download this report. It's been on our top 10 list now for a couple of years. It's definitely a good emerging sort of enterprise tech system. And it's great for those that do want sort of a low code, no code solution. And it's also good for small and mid market companies that are maybe also considering NetSuite or some of these other ERP systems that are built for the small to mid market. So Odoo can be a great fit for that as well. So while we're on the topic though, and as we're talking about trends and predictions for 2025, I encourage you to check out this 2025 report, because we talk about a lot of trends in there. We talk about top 10 rankings and reviews. We talk about other benchmarks. There's a lot of data points in there of what we're seeing in the industry, both from our own internal data, but also from external third-party analysts as well. So here's a question from Darian following up on this low code, no code thread. Darian says, what are the benefits of low code, no code for standardizing processes? Great question. And I'd say low code, no code is a great way to standardize processes, but also give you flexibility. So, you still have the benefit of having some relative standard process, but you can also change it to fit the nuances of your business and what you want your workflow to be. So yes, you can standardize, but I'd say it's giving you actually more of a middle ground to standardize to a certain degree, but also provide yourself and your organization with a little bit more flexibility than you might otherwise have too. So that's what I see as some of the benefits of low code, no code for standardizing processes and finding that balance between the two, between the need for standardization and the need for flexibility and customization. And you think about customization and the impact that's had on digital transformations in the past. I mean, that's really a big reason why so many of these projects have failed in the past, is because of organizations over customizing or trying to change the software to do something it was never built to do. And that oftentimes would lead to failure. I will say, however, the customization, oftentimes this whole customization concept and the risk that customization has on a digital transformation is very real, but I'd say it's actually a symptom of something deeper, which is typically organizational change resistance and change management. The fact that an organization wants to go down the path of least resistance by just keeping the processes the same. Oftentimes that's what leads to customization requests, which then leads to customization, which then leads to challenges and risks, and sometimes complete failures, because you've broken the system so badly trying to customize it and make it do something it was never meant to do, that you just can't get the system working the way you needed it to or wanted it to. Not to mention the fact you're spending a lot of time and money just re-implementing a new technology that does the same exact thing you've always done. There's certainly a ROI sort of question there, or a consideration in terms of why an organization would want to do that. So if I were to maybe summarize some of what we've talked about so far, and this is for a lot of you that might be joining here in the middle of the conversation, but we've talked about some of the trends we've talked about, business adoption of AI, and some more use cases of how companies and organizations are actually going to start using AI. And so in other words, rather than us just sort of messing around with it on our own at home or even in our jobs, I think you're going to start to see organizations that are actually more formally and more deliberately finding ways that they start using AI more widespread, not just in individual use cases, but across the enterprise. So I think that's pretty exciting, because there's so much innovation I think we'll see from organizations as a result of that increased adoption of AI. We also talked about the increased frenzy in cloud upgrades. So we talked about how the fact that organizations are going through so many cloud upgrades within a relatively short period of time. And it's also sort of a manufactured frenzy too. It's the industry creating this frenzy and this chaos around needing to upgrade from on-prem to cloud now. And it reminds me a lot of the Y2K. For those of you old enough to remember, in the late 90s, there was this frenzy around Y2K. Everyone was worried that the world was going to end because the way computers were programmed were 2-digit years. Any sort of timestamp would have a 2-digit year. And people were worried that once 1999 became 2000 and the 2-digit year goes from 99 to 00, everyone was worried that the systems would all break and the world would end and we wouldn't have power or banks or food or whatever. In hindsight, I think that was all manufactured as well. I mean, it was a real fear that was sort of a commonly known risk. And I don't remember a glitch at all, the moment we switched from 1999 to 2000, which would suggest that either everyone just did such a great job with their Y2K upgrade that there was absolutely no glitch, or it could be that the whole thing was a hoax and it really wasn't that big of a risk, but it was a great way for software vendors to force upgrades to new systems right at the end of the 90s. And that created that same sort of frenzy, same sort of increase in failures, same sort of profit margins for software vendors and technology consultants. They all did really well during that time. In fact, that's when I started my career, was in 1998. So I came in right at the peak Y2K frenzy, and I just assumed it was real. And that's, a whole nother story for another time. But looking back, I don't know if it's just because I'm older and more jaded now, but I feel like the whole thing was a bit overblown, and it sort of created this mass chaos to upgrade all at once. And you see the same thing happening now. It's just, now it's not Y2K. It's you have to get off this old system because it's on-prem, or we're going to stop supporting it. And you're going to go out of business and be a failed business if you don't keep up and get to this new cloud solution, which is probably true long term, but doesn't mean you should necessarily drop everything and go invest millions of dollars in a cloud upgrade right now. But regardless, it is what it is. You're seeing that increased frenzy in cloud upgrades. That's one of the things we talked about. We also talked about the increased pace of change. Things are just changing very quickly with AI and predictive analytics and all kinds of emerging technologies and cloud migrations. All this results in change, and it puts pressure on organizations to be better at change, because they simply have to be, as things get more difficult and change quickly. Skill shortages, as we look at this increased pace of change and the increased frenzy in cloud upgrades, that leads to skill shortages, which means that implementations are going to be more challenging to find the right people, because there's going to be so much demand for them, because you have so many organizations going through these big, massive cloud upgrades all in a relatively short period of time. That puts more pressure on the skills that are needed to make these projects successful. We talked about increase in digital transformation failures. Because of a lot of the things we've talked about, that's going to lead to more failures. Digital transformation and ERP implementation failure rates have always been historically high, and in my opinion, unacceptable. And it's confusing to me at times as to why that number doesn't budge or really get any better over time. It's actually, I think the number is going to increase. The failure rate's going to increase now because of all the things we've talked about, which are good things longer term, but short term, that creates more chaos and risk for organizations, because of all the change, skill shortages, going through implementations because they have to, not necessarily because they have a good reason strategically, but because the vendors are telling them they have to. That's, right there, leading to a lack of strategic direction that's leading to a lot of failure. So these are all things that, you just need to be aware of from a risk perspective. And then the other risk that we talked about so far was the increase of cybersecurity risk. So as you see more attempted cybersecurity breaches, you're going to see more pressure on cloud vendors and software providers and IT professionals in general to provide more, tightened down cybersecurity here in the coming year and longer. So those are some of the predictions we've covered so far. There's a couple. I'll get to a few more comments here before we wrap up, but this is from Havana ERP on YouTube. Says Odoo needs a lot of unnecessary customizations. Most of the things you expect to be there by default will not be there. I don't have a strong opinion on that. It depends on what your needs are. I suppose that you could say that about any ERP system is going to have things that you would hope would be there, but aren't going to be there the way you want them. I also do have to ask the question if you are an ERP vendor, because I saw the name Havana ERP, so I don't know if you're a competitor of Odoo's, and maybe you have a stronger bias opinion there. But great question, great point, is something to be aware of. You just want to make sure you're doing your due diligence and understanding what it is you're getting from your cloud provider and that sort of thing. Here's a comment from Pranesh on LinkedIn. Pranesh says, just to add onto you, Eric, Lowcode has a great benefit by empowering the functional centers of excellence and reducing the loads of the developer. In real-time scenarios, there's always great load and wait time for developers to deliver, but these add-ons give the opportunity for more productivity. Some examples are Power Apps, which lets you create your own app. And that's actually a great example. Power Apps from Microsoft are really cool. And that's sort of a semi-techie tool that you don't have to be a deep techie, but it provides you technical capabilities, and it allows you to be more technologically advanced than you really are, if that makes sense, because you've got this way to create Power Apps on the Power App platform using the Microsoft platform in this case. And that's true for, the low code, no code environment in general. It just gives you a way to create apps and create functions and workflows that you would otherwise need to go hire a developer or learn to develop yourself, or go bring in your outside software vendor to change the software for you. And even then, it's risky because you're changing the software, changing the code. But with low code, no code, you're not. So again, it gives you that sort of best of both worlds there, which is pretty cool to see. And I think the low code, no code thing has gotten probably overshadowed by AI, but it is something that's very, very important and something that's trending in the right direction for sure. So I think that sort of wraps up the major trends I want to talk about here today. So I appreciate you all being here. Again, you can find this episode of Transformation Ground Control by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. If you go to that website, transformationgroundcontrol.com, you'll find all the past episodes, but you can also see this episode when it's released here in about 2 weeks. In the meantime, every Wednesday, we have new episodes of the show that get released, the fully polished, fully edited version. And again, you got to be here as part of the live production, the unedited version that allows you to ask some of these great questions. So thank you for being here today. And thank you to the audience. Be sure to check us out again, transformationgroundcontrol.com. Check out Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent and tech agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their software selections and their implementations during their digital transformation journeys. So be sure to check us out. You can go to thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also scan our annual 2025 report right here, scan the QR code to get it, or go to the links below, and we'll include that there. You can also just go to our website, thirdstage-consulting.com. So I hope you all have a great day. We look forward to having this conversation again next Tuesday, same time, same place, different topic, but still related to digital transformation. Thank you for being here. Hope you have a great day.